And now it is my pleasure to introduce our author this evening, Anya Bikont, author of the new book, The Crime and the Silence, Confronting the Massacre of Jews in Wartime Jedwabne. This detailed account of a tragedy that had been lost to history for many years is an important work for the closure for so many involved. Through extensive journal entries and primary sources, Bikont uncovers truths about this crime that had been hidden for decades. Bikont is a Polish journalist with Gazeta Wyborcza, Poland's main newspaper. And she has also won a lot of awards for her journalism. And in 2011, she won the European Book Prize for the French edition of this book. With her tonight is Lydia Jean Cott, a friend of Anya's, and she also works for NPR. She's going to be doing some readings this evening. So please help me in welcoming Anya Bikont to Politics and Prose.
Yes, I would like to welcome all of you, and Lydia Jean Cott, thank you for helping me. And maybe I will start to say some few words about Jedwabne. So, what my book is about, and after Lydia will read some fragments. So Jedwabne is a small town in the northeast of Poland. Before the war, half of the population were Jews and half of the population were Polish. Altogether, there were 3,000 inhabitants in Jedwabne. It was not a shtetl. The shtetl in our imagination is a place that Jews lived their life together, and they had a separate life. And in Jedwabne, the streets, the homes, the schools were shared by Poles and Jews. So they were very close together. They were neighbors, they were classmates, they knew each other very well. In 1939, when the war started, this region of Poland were occupied by Soviets. And in 1941, the German came and they invited the Poles to cleanse the town of Jews. On 10th of July, the Polish inhabitants of Jedwabne killed all but a few Jews. The Jewish inhabitants were rounded up in the marketplace. They were beaten, they were humiliated. First, the young men and the old rabbi were killed one by one with axes, and then the whole population, the elderly, the women, the children, the family, often numbered 6 or 8 children, were herded into a barn and the barn was set on fire. The Polish inhabitants of Jedwabne killed, they robbed as much as they could, they washed the clothes, they went to a mass, and if they forgot what happened. In 2001, the book Neighbors of the Polish-American professor Jan Tomasz Gross reminded them all of that. And it was a huge national discussion in Poland, what happened in Jedwabne, and Jedwabne became the symbol of all crimes committed in this region, but it was not only Jedwabne. 5 days before Jedwabne in Wąsosz. It's a small village nearby Jedwabne. All the inhabitants, Jewish inhabitants, were killed by Poles in one night by axes, one by one. In Radziłów, in the nearby town, all the Jewish inhabitants were killed 3 days before Jedwabne. Most of them were burned in the barn. There were riots and pogroms in all this region where the Poles were involved in the crimes. My book is not only to describe what happened in this part of Poland and in this horrible time, but also I worked on this silence, that 60 years nothing happened and the people lived with it. And I found the Jews who escaped from the place of the massacre, the witnesses, the perpetrators, the murderers, and I talked with them, and I tried to reconstruct what happened after the crime. So it's about my book, and now please, Lydia Jean, to read. Maybe here? Yes?
August 28th, 2000. It's a lie that Poles killed the Jews in Jedwabne, says Tadeusz S., a retired doctor from Warsaw and an eyewitness to the events of July 10, 1941. My boss, Adam Michnik, editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, received this visitor in his office. When Adam informed me that according to Tadeusz S., who was referred to him by a friend, the crime committed in Jedwabne could not be blamed on the Poles, I heard in his voice both excitement and relief. I knew he hadn't been able to come to terms with the facts revealed by Jan Gross and neighbors. We talked about it many times. Gross draws tough conclusions and formulates even tougher hypotheses. In Jedwabne, Poles burned all the town's Jews in a barn, a total of 1,600 people. It was a collective murder in both senses of the word, writes Gross, in terms of the number of victims and of their persecutors. Adam rejected all my proposals to go to Jedwabne, nor did he want to publish excerpts from Gross's book before it was released. Now he wants me to hear for myself what really happened. He has insisted that I be present at this meeting, although Tadeusz S. wanted to meet with him alone. Our visitor doesn't allow us to record the conversation or print his surname. Reluctantly, he agrees to let me take notes. In 1941, he was 15. He happened to be in Jedwabne on July 10th. He says he was on his way to the dentist. In the morning, 2 Germans in black Gestapo uniforms rode into the market square on motorcycles. From a balcony, I watched them ordering the Jews to assemble. They put the rabbi's black hat on a stick to mock him. I followed the Jews all the way to the barn. How many Germans did you see at the barn? Asked Adam. 3. Did any Poles take part in this crime? No, none. And saying that there were 1,600 Jews in there is a lie and a joke. And how many of them do you think there were? I interject. 1,000, no more, Tadeusz S. replies. I look at Adam and see his face go pale. At the end, S. warns us again, please don't mention my name. I don't want those Jewish vultures to lie in wait for me at my house. September 5th, 2000. The Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. I hold 5 little pages written in a sprawling hand with certain words crossed out. It's Shmuel Wasserstein's Jedwabne testimony, translated from Yiddish. Infants were murdered at their mothers' breasts. People were brutally beaten and forced to sing and dance. Bloodied and maimed, they were all herded into the barn. Then gas was poured on the barn and it was set afire. Afterwards, thugs went by Jewish homes looking for the sick and the children left behind. The sick they carried to the barn themselves. Children they hung in pairs by their little legs and dragged them there on their backs, then lifted them with pitchforks and heaved them onto the embers. November 24th, 2000. A colloquium of historians discuss Gross's book. From the threshold, one feels an emotional charge rare at scholarly gatherings in Poland. After several people have drawn attention to the scholarly shortcomings of Gross's book, Marek Edelman, the last living leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, steps up to the microphone. Everybody here would like to find some proof that Gross is a shoddy historian, that he made a mistake, and Mr. So-and-so was killed earlier, and Mrs. Such-and-such later. But that's not what this is about, says Edelman. Jedwabne was not the first case, nor was it an isolated one. In Poland at that time, the mood was ripe for killing Jews, and it wasn't all about looting. There's something in man that makes him like killing. Professor Jerzy Jedlicki, who is moderating the discussion, speaks. Hatred towards Jews, contempt and mockery of Jews, are part of 20th century European culture, and that includes Poland. By that, I don't mean to say everybody would have been prepared to commit atrocities, but the destruction of the Jews was watched with amusement by a significant part of the local Polish population. The amusement, the laughter that accompanied the Holocaust, I remember it because at that time I was on the other, Orion side of the wall. Until today, our stance, and I include myself in this, has been a flight from the subject, a cowardly fear of the darkness lurking in our collective history. With his book, Gross rouses us from our torpor, and that's the most important thing. The colloquium lasts almost 5 hours, and at times it's like a group therapy session. A young Polish staff member of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., speaking of the tide of hatred towards Jews that she's encountered during the year she's been in Poland, reading archival materials, bursts into tears. December 5th, 2000. A letter to Gazeta Wyborcza from Kazimierz Laudanski, the older brother of Jerzy and Zygmunt Laudanski, who were sentenced to 15 and 12 years in prison respectively, protesting the vilification of his brothers. Kazimierz Laudanski praises his family's patriotism. He concludes his letter with the words, "We were and are always prepared to serve our country pro publica bono." I phone Laudanski, and he invites me to Pisz. December 9, 2000. Pisz, 100 kilometers north of Jedwabne. Kazimierz Laudanski is waiting for me at the turnoff to the little road leading to his house. Before we even reach the house, he has asked me where my parents are from and what my mother's surname was. There was nothing wrong with my mother's maiden name, and her first name was also just as it should be. At least after a Pole who was in love with her, got her Orion papers and a baptism certificate, and married her. That's how Leah Horowitz disappeared in Lviv in 1942. She disappeared so completely that I only learned of my origins by accident as an adult. The Jews in Jedwabne, whether they were burned that day or not, their fate was sealed, Kazimierz Laudanski says. The Germans would have killed them sooner or later. Such a small thing, and they slap it on the Poles, on my brothers of all people. It's not right to make our people out to be criminals. It's wicked to accuse Poles of such things, and it's not the time to launch a campaign to teach Poles what's right when Jewish finance is attacking Poland. December 19th, 2000. Pisz. I have a meeting at the local museum with its retired director, Mieczysław K. I was led to him by a chain of people, each referring me on. He was supposed to tell me about the Laudanski brothers. Apparently he could say a lot about them. He's from Jedwabne himself. But when we meet, he is so frightened. It's hard for me to get anything out of him. I'm not surprised. At the museum, a granddaughter of one of Laudanski's is waiting for us, as if by coincidence. How did she find out about this meeting? It's obvious one of the people in my chain of communication informed the brothers. Mieczysław K. explains why he doesn't want to talk to me. Maybe I carried the fear with me from there, but today friends warned me about talking to you. You'd better not get involved. He only recalls that in the summer of 1941, he went by Jewish homes with his pals. They were all occupied and looted, but I was looking for the plates that hung on the doorposts. I liked unrolling what was inside. There were Hebrew words written on hide, sheep's hide, I think. After the war, when they founded a museum in Piche, I gave those mezuzahs to the museum. December 20th, 2000. In the evening, I'm back in Piche. Unannounced, I knock on the door of the little house on the edge of town where Mieczysław K. lives. Maybe I'll get something out of him now? Finally, after 3 cups of tea, he reluctantly begins to talk. In 1941, I was 12 years old. Some mothers didn't let their children outside that day, July 10, but I was always sticking my nose into everything. When Poles were going from house to house, chasing Jews onto the market square, you heard screams and weeping everywhere because they were taking the children and elders too. They used clubs to force the Jews into rows, and they didn't put up any resistance. There weren't 1,600 of them, 1,000 at most. I was at the barn. There wasn't a big crowd outside, just some men, maybe 50 of them. I was standing a little off to the side with my friends. The fear was that they'd take you for a Jewish child and throw you into the flames. It was a hot summer. It took only a little gas and some matches. When they set the barn on fire, the screaming went on until the roof caved in. Józef Kobrynecki threw children into the burning barn. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard Kobrynecki led the mob and that he beat them the worst, and that he even went by the houses to stab people hiding in attics with a bayonet. Other murderers were named too. Karolak, the Lodansky brothers, Zayer. When I grew up, I left the town right away, and since that time, I haven't wanted to have anything to do with it. He cautions me. Please don't mention my name. The Lodansky brothers are still alive. I buy my groceries in Piche. I met one of them in the street once, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I really don't need that. December 23rd, 2000. I drive to Piche this time to meet all 3 brothers Laudansky. I take a slightly longer route via Łomża to pass through Jedwabne by daylight for the first time. Miles of open space here, and there scant clumps of trees. The flat Mazovsha landscape makes me realize how small the hope would have been that you could hide from persecutors. But it's winter now, while then it was July, and there were unharvested crops in the field. In Piche, the Laudansky brothers are waiting for me. We sit across from each other, drinking tea, eating homemade gingerbread. The brothers, poised, calm, present well. They speak their parts like a well-learned lesson. We've been talking for more than 3 hours, and I'm something like my 3rd piece of gingerbread before we come to the events of July 1941. The youngest of the brothers, Jerzy, is the least talkative. A smile plays around the corners of his mouth. From Shmuel Wasserstein's testimony, at the time of the first pogroms and during the slaughter, the following scum distinguished themselves by their cruelty. Jerzy Laudansky is among the few dozen names given here. I was at the barn, says Jerzy Laudansky, but at a distance of about 30 meters. There were a lot of people in front of me. I listen to them and can't resist the impression that scenes from 1941 are being replayed under their eyelids. I have a hotel booked in Piche, but I decide to make my way home by night. I drive on a road, completely deserted and covered with ice, just to get as far away from the Laudanskys as I can.
Thank you very much. Okay, one moment. Okay. I want now to tell the story of one of the characters of my book, Stanisław Ramotowski. I think that it's my favorite character, the righteous among the nation. I became a close friend of him. I met him when he was 85, and his wife was 87 maybe. She was a Jew rescued by him. Stanisław Ramotowski lived before the war in a small village near Radziłów, Kramarzewo. And the Finkelstein, a Jewish wealthy family, had a mill nearby, and Stanisław Ramotowski became friend with one of the daughters of the Finkelsteins. And she had been for a long time his favorite, but of course he had no chance to marry her or to be her boyfriend. He was a Polish Catholic boy from a poor family, and she was a Jewish girl from a wealthy family. When the war in 1941, he knew what happened in Wąsosz. It was the first time that the Poles killed all the Jews, so he was very frightened what could happen with the Finkelstein, and he wanted to help them. He told me, it was still night when people started to drive to Radziłów in horse wagons to settle scores with the Jews. Dziewięcin was on their way, so they stopped to smash the windows at the mill and loot what they could. I promised the Finkelsteins I would go and see what was going on in town. They were dragging Jews out of their homes and driving them into the square. I saw little Jewish kids hugging one another and bowing their heads. I didn't see the barn burning. I wanted to get back and find a good way to hide the Finkelsteins, but I had a good look around. Poles were guarding the streets so that Jews couldn't get away. They were already looting Jewish homes when the Jews were on the way to the barn. Did you see Germans? One policeman. Poles were the one hunting down and rounding up the Jews. And right away they went to Jewish homes to take what they could find. Had they lost all sense of decency? People went crazy. They went into homes, ripped open quilts, fevers were flying around, the wind blew them in all directions, and they went home with a bundle on their backs, only to come straight back with an empty sack. Men? Mostly, but I saw women too, only fewer of them. What about children? Those who could carry things were eager enough. There were crowds of people lining up for it. I just don't know where God was at that moment. Ramotowski managed to hide all the Finkelstein family in the fields. And then, after the massacre, some of his mother's friend told him to marry Rachela Finkelstein, that it would be the way to save her. So they decided to marry it, and Stanisław Ramotowski came to see the priest to arrange the baptism and the wedding. He told me, I went to the presbytery, a big table, 5 stove burners, each with a goose prepared for roasting. The priest asked, how are you going to pay me? Cash isn't worth anything these days. I said, we don't have anything, Father. He replied, it can be rings, earrings, any gold. I told him the Finkelstein's house in Dziewięcin had been completely plundered. There was nothing there, just broken windows and gaping holes. The priest said, I will give you an example. We had Chaim around here, a poor Jew with a bundle, but when they put a knife to his throat, it turned out he had dollars and gold. So Stanisław Ramotowski found another priest who agreed to marry them. He wanted only 6 meters of rice, so it was a good deal. And but it was not a good idea. It didn't change anything, because for Germans, you were a Jew if you married a Pole. You were a Catholic. You were a Jew in the same way. So it didn't help Marianna, and it was worse because they had to be in hiding, and this Rachela Finkelstein, now Marianna Ramotowska, and Stanisław Ramotowski. And the Finkelstein families were hidden in some places in the villages nearby, and someone denounced them, and Marianna and the family were denounced, and the Polish police came and they were sent to the ghetto in Radziłów. In the same night that it happened, Stanisław Ramotowski came to the ghetto, and he managed to escape with Marianna, with his wife, but the family perished. He saved only his wife, and he was in hiding for 3 years. Stanisław Ramotowski and Marianna. She told me about it. So many nights we had to sleep in the woods, in gorges, in bunkers with the rats. She was pregnant, and the child died after a few hours. Then the war was over, and they rebuilt the mill, and Stanisław Ramotowski worked in the mill. One day it was 2 years after the war ended. Marianna Ramotowska decided, so the Rachela Finkelstein, now Marianna Ramotowska, decided to buy the oak cupboard that belonged to the family. She didn't want to have it back. She wanted to buy it, and she asked the murderers who had this cupboard to sell it for her, and to sell it. And the next day, they found a note on the door with a death sentence. And she was pregnant in this time, and she was so scared. She had a miscarriage, and they couldn't have children after that. I asked once Marianna Ramotowska if it ever happened after the war that someone came up to her and said that they were ashamed of what the Poles had done. She answered me, "No, but they weren't that bad to us either. They knew we wouldn't accuse them. On the contrary, when they were suspicious in any case, we went to testify on their behalf." After the war in Poland, there were many trials, and many Poles who killed the Jews were sentenced for long-term prisons and for death. And in Jedwabne, 22 men were accused of killing Jews, and 12 or 17 were sentenced. And in Radziłów, almost no one. And it was because Marianna Ramotowska lived there, and she was so scared that she witnessed on the behalf of the murderers. I read the testimony of Marianna Ramotowska at the trial of Felix Godlewski, who was charged with killing Jews. I am a, quote, I am a baptized Jew. I heard from Jews that they had an exceptionally good opinion of Godlewski. He always helped them before and after the incident. I came to visit them quite often, and I was astonished by how poor was their life. And Dziewięcin and Radziłów is located in a very impoverished area, and the earth is miserable there, but I've rarely seen this kind of poverty and desolation that I did on their farm. And it seemed to me that the main reason for their poverty was Marianna's belief that she had to keep paying off Stanisław's family in order to be accepted by them as a Jew. And once I told Ramotowski my hypothesis. That you notice such things? He looked at me in admiration. I thought of so many hiding places in the house, but no matter how well I hid the money, my wife would always find it in time for the next family visit. And Ramotowski had 2 nephews with family, with wife and children, and they didn't work, they only lived on Ramotowski's money. I asked once Ramotowski why they didn't come to the US or to some other place, how it's possible to live in some place where you know that the neighbors killed your community, your family. She asked me. I was attached to the place where I was born. My ancestors lived here for 3 centuries. And he answered. She was afraid I would be attracted to other women over there. But even if I had been, I would never leave her, not for long anyway. I was always lucky with the ladies, but I liked the one I had, and I wasn't such a bad guy. If ever I came home late, I kissed her, showed her some affection, and somehow it passed. There isn't and there could never be anyone like her in Radziłów. The others couldn't hold a candle to her. Thank you very much.
As he was saying, these massacres were taking place throughout Eastern Europe, particularly in areas where the Germans invaded after the Soviet occupation. Mm-hmm. And in a recent book by Timothy Snyder, he projected the idea that for Soviet collaborators, it was a very easy thing to then turn their ire on the Jews as a result. And of course, there was the incentive of possessions and houses and so forth. So if that is the case, and I think in many cases it was, why was Jedwabne an exception to the rule, or was it just an exemplar of what was happening throughout Eastern Europe?
Yes, Jedwabne is an exception, and it's an example. It's an exception because it's only in Jedwabne, Radziłów, and Wąsosz that all the Jews were killed by the Jews, by Poles, but it's not an exception in the sense that in all this region you had pogroms that were orchestrated by Germans, but the Poles had an active role in these pogroms. And this idea of Timothy Snyder in his last book, that is yes, it's like it was that that it was a very good idea for the Poles, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and for the German to blame the Jews. And the Laudańskis brothers are a good example. They were collaborators in the Soviet occupation. They worked in the police in the German occupation after they belonged to the Communist Party in Poland. So they were collaborators in all possible time. And in the scale of collaboration was not the same, you know, in this region that in, for example, in Ukraine or in Lithuania, in Belarusia. So they were, because Snyder wrote that there were a lot of collaborators. In this region there were some collaborators, but also some many partisans who fought against the Soviets. And it was, and these Poles who were in partisans in this time were denounced by other Poles to the Soviets. So it was also easy to say there were Jews who denounced us.
Do you think that it's part of the human condition that given a state authority that exists at the moment that you live there, that you naturally adhere to their belief systems, and that this is a human condition, or do you think it was just unique to conditions of the time? Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, I understand. I don't know. I think that it's a human condition, but you know there are some times that it's easier to be good, and sometimes that it's easier to be wrong. But in all these times we have people, you know, exceptional people like Stanisław Ramotowski or Antonina Wyrzykowska, the other woman who saved 7 Jews in Jedwabne. So you have always a choice how to behave.
Thank you very much. I'm here because my grandfather grew up in Jedwabne. At
Wow.
the time, though, it was, I couldn't understand whether it was a Lithuanian name, a Russian, German, Polish, because there were so many names and the borders kept changing. But after reading Prose's book, I realized
What
that it
was the name
town.
of your
I think it was
grandfather?
Jabotinsky. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Dobry wieczór. Nice to see you, Anna.
Nice to see you.
I want to say something about Anna Bikont because the introduction did not do her justice, and she will not say it about herself. Anna Bikont was an underground journalist when that was dangerous during Solidarity times. She was one of the editors of Tygodnik Mazowsze, the weekly underground Solidarity paper. In '89, with the end of communism, she was one of the handful of people that went into a legal newspaper. She helped found Gazeta Wyborcza, which is possibly the best newspaper in Poland and in all of Central Europe. And she and her cohort, her friends in Solidarity, are one of the reasons Poland is now able to publish books about its own past, as painful as that is. And Poland, over the last 25 years, emerged from amnesia and lies from the communist period into a period of painful reflection about its own history. That we Americans, the closest parallel is talking about discrimination and Jim Crow after years of silence. And I should mention, I lived in Poland for many years, and I knew Anna at the beginning when I had hair. And Poland was still a poor country. And I just wanted to thank you. It's painful to hear all of that. And I can imagine that Adam Michnik, your boss, who is actually Jewish by his background and a Polish patriot like you, found it painful. But I just applaud you for doing this and writing the book and helping your country and us all. So that's all. I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, in your first couple sentences when you were describing this town, you said the town was half Jewish and half Polish. You didn't say that the people in the town were Polish, half of them were Jewish, and half of them were Roman Catholics. So, you know, it seems in your even initial description, there's a, you know, insight into this story of how this happened, because clearly they were not Poles. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that and the history of that in Poland and throughout other parts of Europe as well.
Yes, of course you are right. I have to say that there were Catholics and Jews because they both were Poles. And yes, it's my mistake. It's only my mistake because the Jews in Jedwabne and generally in Poland, many of them felt as Polish patriots, and they were. We had not an anti-Semitic government before the war, so they treated the Jews as Poles. And for example, before the war, there were a lot of mini pogroms in this area, and the Polish police arrested the nationalists who did the pogroms and sentenced them and shot some of them. So, for example, in the Radziłów pogrom in 1936, there were Poles who were killed by the police. So yes, it's Catholics and Jews, and not Poles and Jews. Yes, you are right.
I'd like to say something or ask you about the amnesia, because that's also a complicated issue. Because during the communist rule, in Poland, the entire history of the period of the war and after post-war period was completely distorted or was a taboo. A lot of people who fought in the underground, in a national underground home army, were tried, tortured, killed. And so there was a lot of resentment that, you know, we Poles were the victims of the German invasion, and that cannot be discussed, revealed, you know, how we fought, you know, the Warsaw Uprising, completely distorted. So there was that reluctance about, you know, pointing to the Jews as the only victim or major victims, which they were, but not about us Poles. So there was an element of hostility involved there. Again, we have the culprit, which is the Soviet system, manipulating the entire view of history. And the Jewish history was also manipulated by the Soviets. You know, the Soviets would say that the Jews who fought were the communists, but not the other ones. So that entire chunk of history was completely distorted. And somebody here before me mentioned Timothy Snyder's book, and I think it's very worthwhile to read, because he has that overall view of those two totalitarian systems and small Poland squeezed between them. So of course a lot of horrible things happened, and maybe they had to happen. And now the fact that you can write your book and speak, it's wonderful. It's a big change. But there will be a lot of people like Laudański who would deny it. Who would say, well, what a big deal. But I want to thank you too for your beautiful presentation.
Thank you very much. Of course, in communist time, you don't. All the history was falsified, and it was not possible to talk about Jedwabne, because it was not possible to say that some part of Poland were occupied by the Soviets. So why in 1931 the something happened? So of course we started at 89 to reveal the truth history, and yes, it's very painful. Yes.
I'm just wondering. It's such a horrendous story. My mother was originally a Russian Jew, but she got over here well before World War II. But I'm wondering, I always thought that much of the anti-Semitism had to do with, at least on the part of the Jews living in countries like Poland and so forth, with the fact that the Jews were held separate and were in ghettoized regions. And yet here is a case where the Jews and the Catholics or Polish Catholics had been living together in some degree of peace. So I'm wondering, what was it, the arrival of the Nazis that gave them permission to release anti-Semitism that they might have felt before, or what it was that could have turned them angry enough and evil enough to burn people and kill children?
Of course, the permission to kill was the most important reason that the German provoked to this killing, but it's not the case that the Catholics and the Jews, not the Catholics and the Jews, lived together in peace before the war, and something terrible happened. And it's difficult to understand why. It's not the case. In the 30s, we had in Europe a growing anti-Semitism, not only in Germany, but in Poland too. And especially in this region, it was the church was incredibly anti-Semitic. And during these small pogroms that happened in Radziu, for example, the priest was the first to came with sticks to destroy the windows of Jewish shops. And in the last years, it was such a hate between. Such a hate that organized by the church, that no one children from Jedwabne received the promotion to the next class, because the teachers didn't ask questions, didn't to the Jewish children, and they didn't took notes. And there were some Jewish teachers in the school, and the father of this Laudański's brother, with the local priest, organized a boycott. When the teacher was a Jew, the children came to the church in the time of a lesson. So no one children came to the school, to the lessons where the teacher was a Jew. So they became to be a separate, to have separate lives before the war. It was in 30. It started after Piłsudski, after one of our chief of the state died. It was 46, 7, 8, and 9. It became worse and worse. So the hate existed before the Germans came. And when the Russians came, it was not that the Russians didn't persecute Jews, because many Jews came to Siberia and were sentenced, especially activists, Zionist activists. But the Jews had easier life. The teacher, they were Jewish teachers in the school. It was so for Poles. It was a shock that the Jews were the same citizens that they were, and also it provoked this elan of hate. Yes.
Is there still a large Jewish population in Poland? And what is the state of anti-Semitism today? Is it still problematic, or have the people moved beyond it?
No, there were very few Jews in Poland. I don't know, maybe 30,000, maybe less. Really few. The anti-Semitism. It's difficult to say. To compare with Europe, we don't have this new anti-Semitism. You know, this anti-Israeli anti-Semitism, something like this. But we have quite a lot of anti-Semitism. It's difficult to say, because we had one candidate to the president who was extremely anti-Semitic, and he always started as a president, and he always received 0.000% of votes. So you can say it's not important, you know, the anti-Semitism. But this, we in Poland, they were not these anti-Semitic incidents, like, you know, that something happened to some Jews who lived there. It's not. But I think that we have a lot of velvet anti-Semitism, you know, some slow anti-Semitism, soft anti-Semitism, that, you know, I am a Jew, and before Jedwabne, because I knew that I was a Jew when I was 33. And I thought in this time that it's something that I could add to me. I am 100% Pole, and I can add that I am also 100% Jew because of my mother. But that it's not that you are 100% Pole minus something because you are Jew. And I realized, working on Jedwabne, that if you are a Jew in Poland, people are suspicious, and it's better to be very polite and to say that the Poles saved a lot of Jews in the wartime. It's what they expected to you. And yes, it was a painful experience.
This will be our last question.
I'll try to make it a coherent one. Thank you for writing the book. It sounds like it was quite a wrenching experience, I'm sure.
Thank you.
I'm wondering whether you could maybe provide a little bit of detail on how this actually kicked off. I mean, when you first started speaking, I was, of course, reminded of a whole bunch of similar atrocities, primarily Rwanda, in which we know that technology was used to actually marshal people and direct people to do X, Y, and Z. And you started talking about this event while it was already underway. But I was wondering whether you could perhaps tell us a bit about how it was instigated. People have been asking about the why. I'm interested in the how. Was there pre-planning? Was there evidence that various German officers with various collaborators sat down and planned it and then decided to put it into effect? How exactly did this begin? The actual event of it?
Yes, the German came, and first when the Soviets escaped, the auxiliary police, a Polish police, was formed, and they took care of the town. And they had some relations with Germans. They came, they talked to them, and they encouraged them. In Jedwabne they talked, you have 3 days to kill the Jews.
The Poles said this, so the
Germans
said this.
The Germans
Poles.
told
Okay.
the Poles,
Right.
you had 3 days to kill the Jews and to loot them. It was that. And so it was encouraged by Germans, but the Germans didn't take an active part of the killing. It was orchestrated by Poles.
By the Polish police.
By the Polish. It's difficult to say police. By the Polish, yes, by kind of Polish police. It was, a 2 weeks long-term
Right.
Polish police. Some people in the town who.
And was there a general
named-
call? Did they get some ringleaders, or they go knocking on doors saying this is what's happening?
They knocked on the doors and they told people to come to kill Jews. It was not obligatory in the sense that there were some people who didn't do it and nothing happened to them. But yes, it was quite good organized, because it's not so easy to kill so many people. But what is horrible in this? It was like a whole town picnic, that all the people came to see it. And for example, the 15-year-old boys came to the field and catch the 12 years old boys, and the 10 years old boy caught the 5 years old boys. So it was really, the town who did it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.